Episode 2 ended with Bull Run's lesson. Enthusiasm is not logistics. Episode 3 follows 1862 as the war grows teeth. River forts fall. Ironclads duel. Shiloh shocks the country. And McClellan's grand Peninsula March collides with Robert E. Lee's first aggressive campaign. In February, Union gunboats and troops under Ulysses S. Grant pressed Fort Henry on the Tennessee River. Flooded works and naval firepower cracked a door the Confederacy had hoped to keep barred. Control of a major western waterway meant men and supplies could move deeper into the South than Bull Run ever imagined. Grant pivoted east to Fort Donelson on the Cumberland. Cold, mud, and bungled breakout attempts ended in Confederate capitulation. The phrase people remembered was surrender, unconditional, and a brigadier general from Illinois began to look like the Union's most dangerous problem solver. Editors who had never heard unconditional surrender Grant now printed it beside maps of Tennessee. Politicians wondered whether genius or luck had spoken. Soldiers simply wanted a commander who moved. In Richmond, planners realized the western rivers were bleeding the Confederacy's interior. On March 9th, the ironclads USS Monitor and CSS Virginia fought to a draw in Hampton Roads. Wooden navies aged in a morning. European admiralties studied sketches. The blockade's anchor at Fort Monroe suddenly looked modern and terrifying to anyone who still thought this war would stay polite. Confederate hopes in the West rested on General Albert Sidney Johnston, who concentrated forces to strike before Grant and Don Carlos Buell could unite. Maps showed a crooked river named Shiloh Church near Pittsburgh Landing, pretty names for ground about to earn an uglier reputation. April 6th opened with Confederate assaults through woods and fields. Many Union soldiers were eating breakfast when musketry replaced conversation. Green regiments learned that drill fields and battle lines are different countries. Officers shouted coordinates that maps could not hold. In a sunken road and thick timber, Union brigades traded space for time, the fighting remembered as the hornet's nest. Repeated Confederate attacks bled units white. Artillery searched for angles through trees. Delay became its own kind of victory, while Grant struggled to stitch a front along the river. Albert Sidney Johnston was struck in the leg. A surgeon might have saved him with a tourniquet, but bleeding took the Confederacy's most respected Western commander before afternoon faded. P. G. T. Beauregard inherited command at the worst moment, victory close, coordination fraying, and night about to interrupt pursuit. Rain fell on wounded men between the armies. Rumors claimed Grant was drunk or broken. In fact, he planned counterblows while steamboats hissed upstream with Buell's reinforcements. Soldiers listened to the river and guessed whether dawn would finish them. The second day reversed momentum. Fresh Federal divisions pushed south until Confederate lines bent toward Corinth. Beauregard withdrew. The field stayed nominally Union. Tactically confused, strategically costly, Shiloh refused to look like a clean win for either side. More Americans fell in 2 days at Shiloh than in all the Revolution's battles combined, a statistic that rewrote public understanding of what this war could demand. Churches read names. Editors asked how 90-day courage could survive such arithmetic. The word Shiloh began to mean not peace, but wound. General Henry Halleck arrived to combine armies and advance on Corinth in methodical, slow steps. Grant simmered under perceived slights. Yet the Union's western mass was learning to march, entrench, and supply at continental scale. Victory's price was patience and egos. David Farragut's fleet ran past forts below New Orleans. The South's greatest port and export mouth slipped from Confederate hands. Cotton piles burned, civilians faced occupation. The Anaconda's coils tightened, where money once flowed out to the world. In the east, George Bay. McClellan landed the Army of the Potomac at Fort Monroe and pushed up the Virginia Peninsula toward Richmond. He believed in intelligence reports, siege guns, and perfect preparation. Lincoln believed the capital needed action before public faith ran out. John B. Magruder's smaller force stretched defenses with theatrical movement, campfires, marching sound, and bluff along the Warwick line. McClellan besieged Yorktown as if the enemy were legion. Weeks passed while Richmond breathed. Wars reward deception as often as steel. Joseph E. Johnston slid eastward, trading space until he counterattacked at 7 Pines Fair Oaks. Confusion in rainy woods produced mixed results, and a Confederate wound that changed history. Johnston fell injured. Command uncertainty ended with one name rising from the chaos. Jefferson Davis placed Robert E. Lee in charge of what would be called the Army of Northern Virginia. McClellan had expected caution. Lee intended offense. Within days, maps around Richmond would fill with arrows aimed at Union supply lines and morale alike. Lee opened the 7 days' battles by striking McClellan's north flank. Mechanicsville's attack stumbled. Gaines' Mill succeeded bloodily, convincing McClellan his base at White House Landing was untenable. The Peninsula Campaign's grand advance began to pivot toward survival. Fighting tore gaps through rear guards. Hospitals and supplies fell behind advancing lines. McClellan shifted toward the James River, framing the movement as a change of base. Soldiers called it something simpler, retreat under fire, while Lee chased opportunity along muddy roads. On July 1st, Union guns massed on Malvern Hill tore apart disjointed Confederate assaults. Lee's army learned that courage uphill into concentrated batteries buys epitaphs. Yet McClellan did not counterattack. He slid farther toward Harrison's Landing, leaving initiative on the table. McClellan's army camped under Navy guns on the James, exhausted but not destroyed. The general wrote long letters about strategy. Lincoln wrote short letters asking whether the enemy's army was still the object. Richmond remained Confederate, Northern patience frayed like wet cartridge paper. Lincoln consolidated disjointed commands into the Army of Virginia under John Pope, a blunt Westerner who promised to see the enemy's food rather than count Washington's fortifications. His rise set the stage for a collision with Lee in the old Bull Run country, Episode 4's opening thunder. Congress pressed harder on slavery as military necessity. Confiscation Acts widened the legal door through which enslaved people entered Union lines. Commanders still argued over consistency, yet the war's moral engine warmed. Emancipation was not yet a battlefield order for all, but law and fact were converging. The Confederacy instituted America's first large-scale draft, angering some who had volunteered for honor, not government obligation. Exemptions and substitutes favored those with means. Class resentment seeped into gray ranks. Both nations were learning that citizen armies need coercion when enthusiasm cools. Salmon P. Chase's Treasury issued legal tender notes, greenbacks, because gold alone could not float a continental war. Inflation's shadow lengthened in both sections. Bond drives, taxes, and printed money became weapons as real as rifled muskets. British mills hungered for fiber. Diplomats weighed law, morality, and unemployment. Antietam still lay ahead as the crisis that would help lock London into uneasy neutrality. For now, recognition of Richmond remained a Confederate dream built on bales and bold letters. We traced river victories, ironclads, Shiloh's wound, and Lee's first great offensive outside Richmond. The Union still held enormous resources. The Confederacy had proven lethal counterpunch. Next, armies returned to Manassas soil, Second Bull Run, and the bloodiest single day at Antietam. Episode 4 follows Lee north, lost orders, and the September fighting along Antietam Creek. Then Lincoln's Pen, Fredericksburg's stone wall, and winter's stalemate at Stone's River. The war's meaning sharpened when slaughter meets proclamation. If Shiloh and the 7 days moved you, seek the after-action reports, dry language hiding screams. Primary sources reward those who read past the first heroic sentence. We will meet you on the Maryland border. Western rivers demanded vessels that could float where frigates feared mud. Naval architects improvised armor and wheelhouses. Siege mortars on raft lobbed shells at angles earthworks struggled to defeat. Desperation and invention met when commanders bolted oak and bales onto steamers. River islands and batteries changed hands as campaigns linked Fort Henry to wider control. Both sides coveted spikes and depots. Corinth became a magnet after Shiloh. Historians still argue clocks and couriers. Soldiers felt only dust and doubt. Political enemies smeared. Veterans often swore their general was ice on the worst days. Mixed signals on April 6th night shaped whether pursuit or pause won the argument. Orchards at Shiloh became dressing stations. Blossoms mixed with lint and blood. Steamboats stacked crates until wharves looked like wooden hills. Rifled musketry shredded branches. Cover was opinion, not fact. Some attacks tried silence. Nervous triggers often wasted the trick. Horsemen reported dust clouds. Infantry still marched blind until contact. Engineers spanned currents while snipers learned range. Quartermasters cursed beasts. Armies moved at the speed of the worst wagon. Tennessee cold taught men to sleep in boots. Frostbite entered letters home. Whiskey prices rose with danger. Chaplains and colonels fought the same war twice. Readers traced rivers like veins. Errors made civilians confident and wrong. Dead heaps appeared in some frames. Public stomachs wavered. Bodies rode home preserved when families could pay. Volunteers handed testaments and lemons. Faith met scurvy. Reformers pushed latrines. Generals learned hygiene by death toll. Women argued with surgeons. Some won. Speed saved lives. Piles haunted orderlies. Western camps coughed. Medicine was scarce magic. Armies experimented. Not every regiment enjoyed equal care. Ladies' guilds measured yards. Lint became love. Broadsheet lyrics rhymed surrender with forever. Occupation rerouted letters. Censorship widened. Mountain loyalty split counties. Guerrilla shadows lengthened. Native nations navigated terrain armies misread. Jayhawker and bushwhacker names multiplied. Western industry fed Eastern envy. Rail schedules linked slaughterhouses to camps. Keel and rib met ironclad dreams. Machines outpaced drill sergeants. Southern forges doubled shifts until hands shook. One spark could erase a neighborhood. Guards walked softly. Confederate commissaries chased coastal boilers. Moonless nights favored hulls low and fast. Retreating Confederates scuttled. Federals inherited ruins and ideas. Monitors, revolving box puzzled traditional captains. Merrimack's conversion symbolized industrial war. Cotton in ears helped little. Close fights turned oak into daggers. Soldiers joked about Pretty George, many still trusted. Intelligence errors made McClellan dig when he might have pushed. Silk spheres swayed. Generals argued over what dots meant. Richmond rings rose with forced hands. Policy lagged courage. Men trained without pay certainty. Decks became pulpits. Waves did not care. Latin mixed with Gaelic curses in assaults. Accents unified under fire, better than politicians expected. Promotions sparked resentments that orders could not erase. Theft from the dead drew firing squads. Discipline and cruelty shared a rope. Rats and terriers negotiated treaties below decks. Sailors fed whiskers for luck. Local knowledge earned danger pay. Underwater threats aged admirals overnight. Coastal beacons became strategic switches. Wrong ford names turned divisions into wanderers. Wagons stuck, men died waiting. Spools ran through woods, cavalry cut them for sport. Operators gambled on secrecy. Praise and pressure arrived in the same breath. The president saw exhaustion up close. Words stayed few. Secretary Stanton's keys clicked faster than horses ran. Politicians grilled commanders, truth bent. State politics shaped muster rolls. The Great Conscription riots waited months ahead. Cash bought bodies, ethics groaned. Provosts traced paper trails of ghost recruits. Cartels frayed as war aims diverged. Men walked home swearing oaths both sides doubted. Women carried silk maps, risk chose gendered cover. Hilltop wigwag caught sun, batteries answered. Direct hits painted arcs of splinters. Smoke turned neighbors into enemies one volley at a time. Spades sang, miners dreamed of powder. Artillery trains stretched miles, mud ruled. Nests drew counter-battery hate. Pistols and carbines mattered more in thickets. Farmers kept tallies they hoped to collect. Age lies filled ranks, sergeants guessed. Boys who beat drums carried men. Tunes faded when surf splashed. Letters to editors shaped home front mood. Newspapers became second fronts. Sailors posed with Dahlgrens, mothers framed them.